Well, we were talking earlier in the program with Ryan Miller about the big leadership conference coming up in Lethbridge in a few weeks, and some big names will be there, including Wayne Gretzky, who will be interviewed by Bob Nicholson, former head of Hockey Canada, now with the Oilers. Arguably, two people who know a lot about leadership and also how it matters in business. Also headlining the conference is the author of a book that has helped to make the business of Disney one of the great success stories on the planet. He is Doug Lipp, also a best selling author of the book Disney U: How Disney University Develops the World's Most Engaged, Loyal, and Customer Centric Employees. Doug was the head of training at Disney, as well as helping set up Tokyo Disney in Japan. So many of us know what it's like to visit the happiest place on earth, but many of us might wonder how the corporation has figured out how to keep employees so motivated and happy. Today, Doug Lipp is my guest to take your calls, emails, and tweets. The number is 1-866-468-4422. That's 1-866-468-4422. Send an email to Alberta at Noon at cbc.ca or a tweet to Alberta at Noon. Tell us what motivates you as an employee. What doesn't work? Or what have you done as a business person to build loyalty among your staff? And if you're looking for some tips, here's your chance. We have Doug Lipp, the author of Disney U, with us today. 1-866-468-4422. We have reached Doug Lipp from his office in California. Good afternoon, Doug.
Donna, I'm sitting here putting on my long johns, my woolies, and my cap before I come up there after the weather report that you just mentioned.
Well, don't worry. You don't need to bring your long johns to Alberta in early October. Usually, Doug. Usually. So don't worry about that. But we do want to ask you about what your message will be when you get here, Doug. Especially in a province like Alberta, where we're constantly jostling to find and keep employees.
Well, that's a really great question, Don. And I was listening to the earlier interaction you had with Ryan, who, by the way, runs a great organization at Teamworks Training Institute. And I've done a lot of work in Canada, in the United States, in places around the world that face the same kind of challenge. And really, when you think about your human resources as your most important resource, many organizations talk a lot about that. But really, when it gets right down to it, very few do show the interest in or respect of their employees, their volunteers, or their students. And so it's really a matter of looking at some of the real basic things that great organizations around the world do. And of course, my background at Disney helps. And I will share examples of things that anyone can do. It's not about budget. It's not about size of staff. It's really about creativity.
Okay, now I want to get to some of the lessons in your book Disney U, but just generally speaking, how does Disney do it? How does the happiest place on earth keep the happiest employees on earth?
Well, my mentors at Disney were people that were hired directly by Walt himself. I never got to work with Walt. He died in 1966, and back then they weren't hiring 11-year-olds to run the park. So unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him. But really what it boils down to is the Disney culture is one that says our employees, and of course they use interesting phraseology, our cast members, are the most important customer, and the cast members are treated with the utmost respect, fully realizing that with that, they will then go out into the park, they will go onto the phone lines or wherever you come into contact with a guest and treat them with respect.
Well, that makes a lot of sense right there. And let's go into a bit more detail from your book, Disney U. There's a section or a lesson called Walking the Park. What's that?
Walking the park is something that Walt Disney himself started, and this is something that I challenge leaders around the world to do, is to get out of their offices and go to the front lines and interact with their employees and their customers, their clients, their patients, whoever that person is. And Walt would walk through the park, whether it was at night and pick up trash, whether it was during the day, he would visit the warehouse at graveyard shift. He was constantly interacting with cast members on stage, those who came into contact with guests, and those who were way, way, way backstage who never came in direct contact with guests, but it sent a powerful message that your thoughts count, your ideas matter to me, and that kind of thing carries volumes when it comes to motivating employees who are in many cases doing work that is rather tedious every single day.
Yeah, for sure. It does speak a lot to the fact that people, the feeling valued is so essential. It's not necessarily about the paycheck, it's about feeling valued. There's also a lesson in your book called Plussing the Show. What is that?
Well, plussing the show is just another way of looking at how do we improve our product or our service. And here's an example. Combining walking the park with plussing the show. Walt Disney would regularly come into the park and ride on the attractions, eat in the restaurants and that sort of thing. And one of my former bosses relayed a story to me. He said he was working on the Jungle Cruise as a skipper, as a boat operator, and Walt came through and rowed the boat. In fact, he rowed all 7 of the boats, and he got off the last boat and he pulled the skippers aside and he was pretty upset, and he said, folks, we have to keep plussing this show. And he said, here's the problem. Every single one of you, when you were driving the boat, and I was sitting on the boat, Walt said, every time we went through that small area in the jungle where the hippos jump out of the water, all of the guests were doing what? And my boss said, well, we noticed the guests were screaming with fright and delight. And Walt said, exactly. But every one of you skippers, you've seen that hippo 5 million times this summer. You know what's going to happen. So you were driving the boat nonchalantly. You didn't care. You were yawning. You were disconnected. We have to keep plussing the show. We've invested millions of dollars in the hardware, but you are the key to success. How expensive is a smile? When I come back next week, I want to see that all of you have plussed the show and you've learned how to smile and be excited.
Yeah, it's like being a customer on your own to your own business and seeing how
Exactly.
people react. That's a really good idea. And you also talk about simplifying the complex. In what ways, Doug?
Well, my mentor, his name was Van France, about whom I write extensively in Disney U. He was the founder of Disney University, and again, he was picked up by Walt to help create the happiest place on earth. And Walt knew that the $17 million he invested in the infrastructure and the rides and the restaurants for Disneyland would not last unless it was populated by people who really cared. And to create that happiest place on earth, Van France, again, the founder of Disney University, and his founding members came up with a brilliant model that a lot of organizations struggle with daily, and it was to simplify the complex. In other words, a theme park is a massively complex facility. It's like a factory into which you invite normal people, guests on holiday who've turned into instantaneously brainless people because they're in holiday mode, but they're still in this environment that has heavy machinery, lots of moving parts. And so Van and his founding members of the Disney University created a 4-step process that basically gave marching orders to everybody in the facility. Safety, courtesy, show, efficiency. Safety is number 1 for employees and guests. Then comes courtesy. When they ask you a question, you smile and you answer their question. Safety, courtesy. Then comes show. How does the place look? How does your costume look? How does the bathroom look? How do the washrooms look? Safety, courtesy, show. And the last was how many people through the system, efficiency or capacity. And if you ask a Disney cast member at any of the 11 theme parks around the world, without skipping a beat, they will say in order of preference and priority is safety, courtesy, show, efficiency. That's basically, metaphorically, Don, it's like taking this giant pot of soup that has lots of vegetables and things floating around in it, which is essentially the complexity of the theme park, and they're condensing it into this nice little bouillon cube that anybody can walk around and hold on to. It makes the complex much simpler and easier to replicate.
It all makes sense. I'm in conversation with Doug Lip. He is the best-selling author of several books, including his latest, Disney U, How Disney University Develops the World's Most Engaged, Loyal, and Customer-Centric Employees. We are asking you today, what motivates you as an employee? What doesn't work? What have you done as a business person, perhaps, to build loyalty among your staff? And if you're looking for some tips, give us a call right now, 1-866-468-4422. Doug will be speaking at the upcoming Greatness and Leadership Conference in Lethbridge on October 7th. That's 1-866-468-4422. You can also send us an email to alberta@noon@cbc.ca or a tweet to Alberta at Noon. And Doug, we got a couple of tweets coming in now. Chris sent this one. Chris says, a pay scale that doesn't top out is a good start. Once you hit the top of a scale, there is no motivation to improve. That's an interesting idea. And then Ryan tweeted, cash. That's what motivates me. Feeling of belonging, and that you aren't easily replaced, that you are not a number. That's a really interesting one, too. How would you respond to Ryan's tweet, Doug?
I think the portion about that feeling of belonging is crucial. In fact, we used to joke at Disney that Disney is a great place to work as long as your parents can afford to send you there. Decidedly, the hourly employees and middle management, it was not a place where you worked to become rich, but it was that feeling of belonging to a team, feeling respected, regardless of the role you had. The other, as an example, if I'm working, again, backstage in a warehouse at 3 o'clock in the morning, it would be very easy to feel disconnected from the front lines. But that's the key, is that through that concept we discussed earlier, Donna, of walking the park, managers, supervisors were constantly getting in touch with cast members and employees to make sure that things were going well, and to have that touch point on a regular basis showed that you matter to us, you're part of the team. That is so much more powerful than just throwing money at people. Certainly, if money is not enough, that's a demotivator, but there's all kinds of research that shows that money is only a slight blip in the radar to motivate people. What really matters is how they're treated.
1-866-468-4422. That's 1-866-468-4422. My guest today is Doug Lipp, the best-selling author of several books, including his latest, Disney U, How Disney University Develops the World's Most Engaged, Loyal, and Customer-Centric Employees. Many of our listeners are listening at cbc.ca/Alberta at Noon, but many of our listeners also are listening and may have some issues with transmission. We are having some problems transmitting in the Calgary area. We are working on it. So tune in online at cbc.ca/Alberta at Noon. We got this email from Dora, Doug, who says, what motivates me at work is the continuing opportunity for new challenges. I need to feel I can keep moving forward. How essential is that for employees, too, that they can see that there is more ahead if they do a good job, Doug?
Vitally important. In fact, it ties in with a comment, one of the tweets that came in from Chris, who said, if I hit the top of the pay scale, there's no motivation to improve. I'll give you a specific example. I worked as a sweeper on Main Street when I was getting ready to go to Japan to open up Tokyo Disneyland. Working as a sweeper is a tough job because you're constantly picking up guests' trash. And I found within a few days, my mindset was kind of like, wow, people are really kind of pigs. This is not really fun. And I could feel my energy getting sucked out of me. Long story short, the supervisor of the sweepers, who was maybe in her mid-20s, pulled us aside and said, okay, tomorrow is the Sweeper Olympics. I want you all to go out and collect as many silly questions from guests as you can, such as, example, Donna, people would ask multiple times, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? And you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, have you been paid to ask me stupid questions? But here's the point. One day I went out with this little clicker in my pocket and I started collecting all of these questions, because if you got the most questions as a sweeper, you won this little perpetual trophy that looked like a sweeper. And we sweepers were going after that with such competitive fervor, kind of like owning the podium in Canada. And what we found was that after several days of doing this, the supervisor then debriefed what had gone through our minds, and she said, a week ago you were all burned out and stressed out because guests asked you silly questions. silly to you but important to the guest. Where are the washrooms? What time is the 3 o'clock parade, etc.? Most of you had about 10 questions in a day, and that burned you out. Now we look at the winner of the Sweeper Olympics who got 120 questions, and the rest of you got 60 or 70. And how do the rest of you feel right now? And in unison, Donna, we all said, we are so enthused and energized. We want to go back in the park and get more stupid questions so that we can win the Sweeper Olympics Award next month. So here's an example of a supervisor that didn't change the essence of the job, but she read our minds and knew what was challenging us and produced a turnaround that was massively creative and massively effective for no cost.
I love it. That's fantastic. We have Joyce calling now from Edmonton. Hello, Joyce. What would you like to say about this, about motivating employees or being a motivated employee?
Hi. Yes, I'm an owner of a small business. I have about 20 teenage employees that are all part-time, and I often have a hard time keeping them longer term or buying in, so they're not distracted using cell phones, etc., when they're not supposed to be. So any kind of tips is greatly appreciated.
Oh, that's a great question. How would you respond, Doug?
Well, Joyce, there is so much that you are talking about. First of all, is the kind of people that we get on board in the first place. I've worked with a lot of small businesses that have 5 to 25 employees, and oftentimes with teenagers, you look at that as that age group as a different culture, and how do you relate to them? And one of the things is to look at who you're actually hiring. Are you actually hiring kids that want to work for you, whether it be for 3 months or 3 years, or are you just filling empty requisitions with heartbeats? Not to be contrite or anything, I'm just trying to be honest, is that sometimes owners will hire the first kid who walks in the door. The second part of that is cell phones. I was doing some work with a major do-it-yourself home center in the United States, and I was walking through one of their centers with a senior executive. This organization has a very strict policy of no cell phones on the sales floor, and they have no problems at all, and this is why. We were walking through the do-it-yourself center. I asked him a question about a product. He didn't have the answer, and so I said to him, why don't you look it up on your phone? He said, I can't. I'm an employee. No phones allowed on the floor. You're not an employee, he said to me. You can look it up. And right there, I stopped him. I said, that is why you are so successful. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, so to speak, is he walked the talk.
Okay, that's good.
So, Joyce, what is the biggest issue when it comes to your small business to keep the kids motivated? What do you think about what Doug was saying?
Well, I do suffer from the let's just fill it with a body to get done. So that's a really good just reminder to keep my eyes open for not just any employee, but specific employees, so that maybe I can draw out what motivates them and work with that.
Thank you very much for the call. We appreciate it. And thank you, Doug, for that advice. We have this email from Andrew who says, I did get a raise, but I never get any feedback on my work. And honestly, I don't feel appreciated. Well, I wonder how many hundreds of thousands of people there are just like Andrew, Doug.
There you go. And there's an example of somebody receiving the money and it did absolutely nothing other than maybe help his or her bank account. But it did nothing for motivation or connectivity to the team. And that's something, even at Disney, after Walt Disney World opened in the early 70s, there was a tremendous letdown. After a grand opening of any sort, people are tired. They've possibly lost motivation, and Disney did a tremendous job to turn around that culture by connecting with cast members, and it always boiled down to, are you paying attention to us? It had nothing to do with money. For example, at Walt Disney World in Florida, underneath the park are things called utilidors. They're long hallways, and before the employees gave the feedback, these had not been painted. So in talking to the employees, they said, we feel like rats in a maze. These long hallways underground are dark, they're gray, they're boring, they're depressing. And after hearing feedback from them, the staff down there painted the hallways. They let employees paint their own pictures, and it turned into a wonderful, whimsical utilidor area that actually served as a motivator. But again, it was by listening to what cast members said and doing something about it.
It's very interesting that you say the people who run things need to listen to the people who are on the ground doing the work. That just sounds like something that makes so much sense, but perhaps people don't always get enough time or don't think to do it at the
Well,
time.
I'll give you another example, Donna. Another executive with whom I used to work who participated in the Disney U-Book talked about when he was working as a ride operator on what was called the Skyway, be like a ski resort gondola. And Walt Disney showed up one day in the middle of December, kind of a slow business day, and said to this guy, "Hey, we're going to redo this attraction. Do you have any suggestions? You work this ride every day. You know it better than anybody, better than the engineers, better than me." And this guy said, "Well, Walt, you know what? When I load and unload guests, oftentimes they bump their head on the roof of the gondola because it's too low. I suggest we raise it 6 to 8 inches." And lo and behold, in the ensuing months, when that ride was redone, they raised the roof on that thing. Now, you can only imagine how that story spread like wildfire through the park, where people realize, wow, Walt comes in, he asks questions, he doesn't implement everything that he hears, but by golly, he listens and he respects our feedback.
And it sounds like he listened to everyone, not just a select group of people at his
Precisely. He
workplace.
said, one of Walt's great quotes is, "I will gather information from anybody, whether it's a janitor or a vice president, because if it helps plus the show, I'll do it."
Fantastic. Thank you for that email, Andrew. And we got this email from Jonathan Doug, who says, the people you work with make a huge difference for me. I worked a job that didn't pay well and had long hours with little breaks, but the people that I worked with were great, so it was fun compared to a different job I once worked that paid really well but didn't have such nice people to work with. It does make a difference. Coworkers help a lot when you have a good team. So that was interesting too that he used the word team. And we got this email from Guy who says, it is hard for employees to be engaged and become loyal to their employers when employers download what was once corporate risk over to their employees, such as pensions, making staff use their personal vehicles, or changing worker status over to a contractor, forcing employees to purchase their own liability insurance for the privilege of working for somebody else. So two very different emails there, Doug. What do you make of them?
I always look at it as a complaint or a challenge as the tip of the iceberg. And as a consultant, my radar starts to go up and say, well, this is what employees are concerned about or complaining about. Well, what is the real issue? Whether it's I have to pay for my own pension or I have to drive my own car, I look at that as, okay, that's something that is obvious, but what is under that iceberg? What is the 90% that nobody has uncovered yet that is the real deal? Another example, again, my mentor at Disney, who was the founder of Disney University, Van France, was brilliant and very similar to the email you just received. One of his great quotes is, "A maxim of the movie industry is that it takes a happy crew to produce a happy show." And this guy, Van, would walk through Disneyland with a camera around his neck. Now, this is back in the days before cell phones. This is a real camera with film, right? And he would interact with guests. He would go talk to the crew in the kitchen. He would have lunch with guests, with cast members, day shift, night shift. And he was saying, I wanted to walk the park just like Walt. I was looking for facts and feelings. Now, what's interesting, Donna, is 9 times out of 10, there was no film in Van's camera. He was merely using the camera as a bridge to connect with people because we all like to get our pictures taken. And that's something that if, as a leader or an owner of a business, if people are complaining about X, Y, or Z, it doesn't matter to me what they're complaining about. It's incumbent upon me to go past all the middle managers, get past all of the survey data, and get out there and feel what's going on at a visceral level as opposed to being far removed.
Thank you so much. That is Doug Lipp, the best-selling author of several books, including his latest, Disney U, How Disney University Develops the World's Most Engaged, Loyal, and Customer-Centric Employees.